These days, we're communicating more over the internet than ever before. We use services like Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, and other software to connect with our work colleagues, teachers, friends, and family. In this podcast, we'll help you with some vocabulary and expressions for when you speak in English using VoIP. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello and welcome to the podcast, especially if you're a new listener. My name's Craig.
My name's Reza.
And with nearly 50 years of teaching between us, Reza and I are going to help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, and much as I enjoy the benefits of internet conferencing, it's lovely to see you face to face in person for a change.
I know, I feel spoiled. This is the third week in a row, or third week one after the other, that we're meeting together and I can see you face to face. So it's really good to be podcasting again in person with you. What's first this week?
First up, we've got a voice message from Kike from Valencia.
Hello Reza, hello Greg, it's Kike again from Valencia, and this audio record is to share with you 3 useful sentences that I discovered in the book Sapiens. These sentences are the following. The first one, when push comes to shove, it's like a la hora de la verdad in Spanish. He tends to be very kind, but when push comes to shove, he shows his real face. The next one is be that as it may, and it's like sea como fuere. For example, Helen told me Carol wouldn't come to the party. Be that as it may, we should do it anyway. And the last one is I happen to, like resulta que yo. For example, I happen to be fond of the stock market. I hope you find this sentence useful, and I encourage you to share with us another similar useful sentences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kike. It's really nice to hear from you again. Regular listeners might remember Kike because he sent us a message recently telling us that he's reading the book in English called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. So thank you again for giving some examples. Before we look at the examples from that book, Kike, 1 or 2 things that you could improve in your message. The first thing is, I think you said the record, and it should be the recording. So use the ing present participle with that. So I'm sending you the recording, or I'm sending you a recording.
Yes, Kike, and there was another little thing with your pronunciation, which a lot of Spanish speakers have. You said 3 useful sentences. Well, now, if it's plural, 3, then it should be 3 useful sentences. We need an extra syllable. And I think that happens because the singular sentence is 2 syllables, sentence. With a silent E at the end, you don't pronounce the E. And it's similar for other words like language, baggage, yeah. But when it becomes plural, then you do pronounce the E, and that's what people forget. So sentence, 3 useful sentences.
So your first example sentence, which is singular sentence, you said when push comes to shove, which is an expression. Now, to shove and to push, they're very similar words, aren't they? When you push someone, when you shove someone, you move them maybe violently with your hands, for example. But we use it when we're forced into a situation that we might have to take some action or do something. For example, we're a bit short of money at the moment. We don't have much money. I've lost my job. So if push comes to shove, we might have to sell the car. So if I'm taken to that extreme, I might have to do something or take action. when push comes to shove.
Another nice expression you mentioned, Kike, was be that as it may. Be that as it may. That means you accept that a piece of information is true, but it doesn't change your opinion of the subject that you're discussing. So it's like accepting a counter argument, but you still insist on what you said before being true. For example, imagine I say to you, the weather is terrible in Ireland all year. I don't think we should go there in the summer. And you say, be that as it may, there's a lot of things you can do in Ireland, even with the bad weather. Be that as it may, I accept that, okay, but I haven't convinced you. You still believe that we should go to Ireland.
Well, here's another example. Some students study English every day. They study grammar. They do grammar exercises. They're constantly practicing English. Be that as it may, you need to speak English in order to improve your fluency. So it's not enough to do these exercises. You also need to speak English and practice. And Kike's third sentence or example was, I happened to. Now, we can think of two maybe uses or motivation for using that expression, I happened to. One could be thinking that it's something that happened by chance. I could say to Reza, do you happen to know the time? Do you have the time by chance, by coincidence? Do you happen to know the person I was speaking to yesterday? So, por casualidad, maybe in Spanish. But there's another way we can use it, isn't there, Reza?
Yeah, there's another way, which is to basically say the same as actually, which isn't actualmente. That's a false friend. It's like saying, well, what I'm going to say may surprise you, or it may somehow go against what you expected. Imagine you say to me, oh, Julio Iglesias is a terrible singer. He's for old people. He's so out of date. It's embarrassing. And I say to you, well, I happen to like Julio Iglesias. So you didn't expect me to say that. I happen to like him. So I'm saying, actually, I like him. Be careful what you say. By the way, may I stress that that's an example? I do not like Julio Iglesias.
Actually, you do.
I do not. Craig.
I happen to know he's one of your favourite singers.
Craig, you better edit this out.
You told me yesterday, the Beatles, number 1, Van Morrison, number 2, Barry Manilow, number 3.
Julio number 4?
Julio, number 4.
Yeah.
Next, we have a voice message from Sonia from Barcelona, who is at the moment living in Berlin.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Craig. I just want to say thank you because today I was listening my own voice in your episodes with the episodes that you did for the chocolate. I think that now I know how to pronounce well. And also the one that Reza explained us a bit about his experience in Berlin. And yeah, I can imagine that was super interesting in that period after the wall falls down. And what crazy to imagine that some Berliners didn't know about the other part. Oh my God, yeah. And yes, that's all. Just to say thank you. And I hope that you both are healthy and best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. It's lovely to hear from you again. We hope that the weather in Berlin is warming up for you a little bit now. We're recording this in March in Valencia. The weather's getting lovely and warm, and we hope that's also true for you over there in Berlin. Reza, is there anything in Sonia's message that we could help her improve?
Dankeschön, Sonia. Very good message. Thanks very much. Really good pronunciation on the whole. But there's one or two little things we could improve. I think you said, I was listening my own voice. Remember, listen to something. I was listening to my own voice. You said you were talking about the Berlin Wall, and you said the wall falls down. Well, you were talking about the past. So the past of fall is fell. But even that's not so good. The wall fell down, because that makes it sound like it was an accident. No, people took the wall down. So we would say the wall came down. That would be the best way of saying that.
So thanks very much, Sonia, for your comments on the chocolate episode. Excellent pronunciation of chocolate. We were very happy to hear that. And if anyone listening wants to listen to our episode on chocolate, go to inglespodcast.com/353. Now, as we said at the beginning of the podcast, so many people now, because of coronavirus restrictions, are communicating using the internet. And I said at the beginning, we're using VoIP, VoIP, which stands for Voice over Internet Protocol, a way of using your voice and sending it in packets, in information packets over the internet so that we can communicate. And there are different services for this. There's Skype, Zoom. You can use voice in many, many different applications these days, but you may need some English to help you communicate better with the person you're speaking to. So Reza, what kind of expressions, vocabulary can we help people with when they're speaking online?
Well, let's start right from the most basics. When you've entered the Zoom chat room, probably the first thing you're going to say is, "Can you hear me?" Or "Can you see me?" Or both. So that's absolute basic. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
I was speaking with a friend of mine in the US, my friend Danny, yesterday on Skype. And we were trying to get the microphone working, and we were using that expression. Can you hear me? I can't see you. I can hear you now, but I can't see you. All those expressions of hearing and seeing we were using repeatedly yesterday all the time. And then suddenly the communication completely broke down, which means it stopped. There was no connection. So when that happens, you could write in the chat if the chat's working, or you can say, if you have audio, "I've lost you," or to be more polite, "I'm afraid I've lost you," which means I've lost the connection, but you've also lost the person on the other side of the connection. So "I'm afraid I've lost you," or if it repeats, "I'm afraid I've lost you again."
If you're like us, very interested in audio quality, as all podcasters should be, you will want to ask the question, how do I sound? How do I sound? So you're checking the quality of your microphone and you're asking the other person.
If you're having problems hearing or seeing the person you want to communicate with, then you'll ask the question, is your microphone on? Is your webcam on? So 2 more questions to check that the other person is trying to connect with you. Is your microphone on? Is your microphone connected? Is your webcam on?
Another possible area of problems is background noise. So you may have to say, there's a lot of noise in the background. You could also say there's a lot of background noise. So noise which isn't the main people who are supposed to be speaking. It could be somebody else speaking who's not invited to the chat in the room, or it could be people moving chairs, or it could even be technical sounds appearing, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could be the dog Coco barking.
Yeah, that's happened to me once or twice.
One reason why you can't hear the other person is because they may be muted. To mute is a very common verb with VoIP. So M-U-T-E, to mute, is to silence the microphone. And of course, on many software applications, you have a mute button. So you could check with the person, are you muted? Is your mute button on? Is your mute button off? And the opposite of to mute is to unmute. So use the prefix un, U-N, as the opposite. So can you unmute yourself would be the question. Can you unmute yourself? I can't hear you.
Can you unmute yourself? Or you could say, can you turn on your microphone as well, right?
Yeah.
Or if you can't see the person, can you turn on your video or your camera? Or to use the correct terminology, but many people don't, can you turn on your webcam, please?
Another polite expression you could use to ask the question, apart from can you or could you, is would you mind? Just remember that with would you mind, if you use a verb, you need to put the verb in the gerund, use the gerund form of the verb. So with the verb to mute, for example, would you mind muting yourself? Would you mind turning on the webcam? Would you mind hitting the mute button? So to hit the button is to click or to press the button. So would you mind hitting the mute button? Can you hit the mute button, or could you hit the mute button? Maybe you can hear the person you're speaking to, but the audio is not very loud. It's very soft. And soft audio we can also describe as faint, very low volume, F-A-I-N-T. So if you say to someone, you're very faint, that means you can't hear them very well. And if they say to you, you're very faint, you need to turn up your microphone, get closer to your microphone or increase the volume. Another way to say you're very faint, I can barely hear you. I can hear you, but only just. I can barely hear you, or I can hardly hear you. And then, of course, ask the person to turn up the volume. Can you turn it up?
Another thing that could happen, they're not unlucky.
Reza, you're breaking up.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yes.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, sorry. I guess I was breaking up there. Yes. So Craig said to me, you're breaking up. So it wasn't a question of being faint. It was that something happened with the microphone or my computer, some kind of technical problem. And the signal, the reception was coming and going. So you heard me for a few seconds, then for a second or two you didn't, then you heard me, then you didn't. I was breaking up.
So I can't hear you very well because you're breaking up. Remember, all of these expressions are on the webpage in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/358. Reza, what browser do you use usually?
Just because people have advised me, I don't understand the technical reasons why, I always use Google Chrome. What about you?
The same with me. But in case someone listening does not exactly know what a browser is, can you think of other browsers apart from Google Chrome?
Apart from Google Chrome, you've got Internet Explorer, or the more modern version of that from Microsoft Edge, or I've also heard of Mozilla Firefox, and then of course Safari, which I think is the one that those lucky people who can afford anything from Apple have, which is Safari. I don't often use that because I don't often find myself using an Apple device. How do you find Safari?
I don't use Apple very much either, so I can't really comment. But that's another question you might hear, and it's a question that sometimes we need to ask as teachers when we're connecting to students. Are you on a Mac? Are you on a PC? Are you on a mobile device? Are you on a tablet? Are you on a laptop? Are you on a desktop? So what's the difference between those devices? Mobile, tablet, laptop?
Well, as far as I know, you can't normally download documents which come through the chat on a tablet. Is that right?
It's more complicated sometimes, yeah. With our students, if they are using a mobile phone, sometimes it's difficult to send them documents and work with them with mobile devices.
Yeah, so my advice as a non-expert, but someone who uses Zoom and Skype a lot, is definitely try to use a laptop or a desktop computer, particularly if you expect to receive documents. Much easier to download them.
When you're speaking over the internet, you may get a very bad connection. And as we said before, you might get lots of background noise. You might get dropouts, Skype dropouts, for example. So it's very difficult to communicate. A question you could ask in that situation is, shall I call you back? Or with, would you like me to call you back? Would you like me to call you back? Maybe the connection will improve.
Trying to find out what the problem with the connection is, you could ask, do you have enough bandwidth? So your bandwidth is the speed and the efficiency which the internet signal is getting to your computer at. So you ask, do you have enough bandwidth? You could also ask, are you on Wi-Fi? Or you could say, are you on Wi-Fi or cable? When we say cable, we mean not Wi-Fi, but with a cable, a wire going from the modem or router directly to your computer, which most of you probably know is better quality. You're always going to get better internet connection that way.
I wonder what the difference is between a wire and a cable, because in Spanish it's un cable. I think it's the same word, but isn't a wire thinner than a cable?
For me, not necessarily. The way I look at it is a wire is definitely thin. A cable could be thin or thick. For me, a cable's either. But for some reason, a wire is definitely thin. Yeah?
Yes, definitely thin. So there could be wires inside a cable. We speak about cable TV that comes in through the internet, but we speak about wired connections. So a wired connection is connected directly to the internet.
Craig, do you ever get your wires crossed?
Very often. The older I get, the more my wires get crossed. What does that mean?
It's the same in Spanish. Cruzarse los cables.
Get confused.
Yeah, you have exactly the same expression. But notice you say cables. We don't say cables. For that expression, you have to say wires to get your wires crossed.
And if I have too much coffee in the morning, I feel very wired, very energetic.
If somebody's connection is bad, you could say, try using a wired connection as opposed to Wi-Fi. Try using a wired connection.
Another way to solve the problem of a bad or weak connection is to change from video to audio. Very often, if you turn off the webcam, you're using less bandwidth. Bandwidth is banda ancha. So to turn off your video sometimes helps with the communication and the audio connection. So one suggestion you could make is let's change from video to audio.
If there's no other option, you're having a lot of difficulty, you could say, would you prefer to call me on the phone? I guess that's the last ditch resolution. Last ditch means you've tried everything else, nothing else is going to work.
A last resort.
The last resort, exactly. The good old phone.
Would you prefer to call me on the phone, or would you prefer calling me on the phone? You could use the gerund there also. Although hopefully you won't have these problems, and you can just say, you sound great, Reza. Reza, you sound fantastic. I can hear you perfectly. I can see you perfectly. Make sure you use those verbs hear and see, and not listen, watch, and look that have slightly different meanings. I can hear you. I can see you perfectly.
Well, of course, we always hope that you can hear us perfectly in the podcast, but I'm very glad that you can't see me perfectly, or in fact, you can't see me at all, because you might not be such a fan of the podcast if you could see me. It might put you off. It might discourage you.
I can see you perfectly, Reza, and I like your podcast t-shirt you're wearing.
Craig, what if a person has had lots of difficulties and after a lot of trouble, the problems are solved? What could you say to them?
You could say, you're back again, which means you have returned, like Batman. You're back again, or you're back again now. I can see you, I can hear you.
Yeah, you've got to remember that you sometimes have to tell people about their own situation on Zoom because they don't know. If you're having trouble, you maybe don't know that people can't see you. You don't know that they can't hear you. So you're relying on the other people to tell you, oh, you're back again. And you might be surprised to say, oh, you can see me? All right, great. So you have to tell people what's happening with their connection sometimes.
And very often you can use the chat to communicate what's happening if there's no sound. So the chat usually works and you can write in the chat. One other thing you might need to do, or you might need to ask someone to do, is to share your screen. Of course, share is compartir. So if you share your screen, the person you're communicating with can see what is on your computer screen. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you see it? Is a question you might ask. Or could you share your screen if you want the other person to show you something? So I'm sharing my screen. Can you see it? And can you share your screen?
So as Craig said, you can send documents in the chat or through the chat. And remember to tell people that they need to act, if not quickly, certainly before the chat finishes. Because once the chat's finished, if you haven't downloaded something that's been sent to you, you can't do it any longer. So it's a good idea to say to people, can you download or could you download and save that onto your computer, please? You don't have to add the words onto your computer. So you could say, could you download and save that, please? Because the quicker they do it, the better. If they forget and the chat's over and you close the meeting, they won't be able to do it after that.
Of course, the opposite of download is upload. And be careful of your prepositions, because you can download something from the internet to your computer. You can also download something from your computer to a memory stick or an external hard drive. So be careful of the direction you're downloading or uploading. Download from, download to, etc.
I hope you never are the victim of Zoom bombing. I once was. It wasn't my fault. I was giving a class to teenagers, and I'll never know the truth, but I highly suspect that one of the students, without permission, gave the password to a friend, a brother, a cousin, and he got passed along, and somebody who wasn't invited to the class, most of all because they hadn't paid any money, so they had no right being in the class, they appeared in the chat, and they could only have got in with that password. It was a password protected Zoom meeting.
What happened when they Zoom bombed? Did they disrupt the lesson? Did you have to close the Zoom call? What happened?
We did, because bear in mind, of course, that these were under 18s. So there's all sorts of legal difficulties you could be in, internet, people underage, someone uninvited being there. It's a legal nightmare. So I threw them out of the chat. Yeah, you can throw someone out of a room. You can throw someone out of a chat.
Not physically.
Not physically, so metaphorically, a few times. But they kept getting back in. They were very clever. They were very computer literate, because they used names of people in the class. I guess that the first thing they did, as soon as they illegally got in there, was to take note of all the names which appear in the screen. And so then they put in the names, and I let them in thinking that they were somebody else. They got in originally using a false name. And then when I blocked that name, they kept using all the other names. So it forced us, I say me and the organization I was working for at the time, we had to change the password. It was very inconvenient, but we were lucky. This person simply covered their face so we couldn't see who it was. I think it was probably another teenager, and did silly things. But imagine it was an adult who was doing, crazy things or, obscene things. That would have been a case for the police. I was very, very worried.
So to use Kike's expression, when push came to shove, you had to close the session and start a different session.
Yep. We did that once. And the next week they got in again, and that's when we realized that they got the password. And it really didn't matter what we did, so then we had to change the password.
It sounds like a technical nightmare.
Yeah. So that's called Zoom bombing. When someone comes into a Zoom chat uninvited.
We hope that doesn't happen to you. And we also hope that you found this podcast useful with the selection of internet vocabulary that we've introduced to you. Remember, you can see all of these expressions in the show notes. But now it's your turn to practice your English. We'd like to hear from you, and our preferred method of communication, it's by SpeakPipe. Send us a voice message. Go to SpeakPipe, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. And emails, Reza?
You could email Craig, write to craig@inglespodcast.com, or me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you are using voice over the internet for job interviews, you might be interested to know that we do have a PDF and MP3 course to help you prepare your interviews in English. If you'd like more details on how to prepare a job interview, go to store.mencioningles.net.
As always, thank you to all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast through Patreon. That's Patreon. You can see a list of all the Patreon supporters if you go to patreon.com/Inglespodcast. We unfortunately haven't got time or space to mention all of them right now, but we will mention our most recent sponsors who decided to donate as little as $1.20 to include VAT every month. And they've joined because they want to get instant access to recent transcriptions. Who are our most recent donors, Craig?
They are Negesa, Eminen. I don't think that's the famous rapper. That's Emi with the letter N. Enrique Gonzalvo and Antonio Tomas Palacios. Thank you very much for your support. And thank you to all of our Patreon supporters.
Craig, what have we got on next week's episode?
Next week, we're speaking about bread. So make sure you eat before you listen to that podcast, because we don't want you to get hungry while you're listening. Join us next week to learn more about all different types of bread. Until then, thank you for listening this week. It's goodbye from Reza.
And bye-bye from Craig.
Music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.